Welcome back. Mayor de Blasio announced the New York City Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative Draft Plan. And as a part of that plan, the city will formalize a task force for the health and safety needs of sex workers. NYPD policies and procedures for identifying and investigating human trafficking will be reviewed in order to find alternative methods to addressing sex work. Here to tell us more about this is Dr. Q English, co-chair of the New York Anti-Trafficking State Coalition. Dr. Q, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So just to start off, can you tell us more about this reform plan?
Yes, absolutely. The reform plan as written is definitely not something that we advocate for. In particular section, and I'm just going to address the section that relates to their recommendations on improving policies and approaches to combating human trafficking and sexual and labor exploitation. And what's happened in the plan, it was, we feel it was a way for them to create the dialogue and a clear path for legalizing prostitution in New York. The actual section discusses what they would like to do, like to do for those that are being trafficked. Obviously, more services, more intentional services, which is absolutely great. That was one bullet of that section. Mm-hmm. The rest of the section talks about the protection and what they're going to do in the area of for sex workers, which is the problem. Not because we don't care about, what they go through and their livelihood. Our advocacy is for them to get services. It's for them to get housing. It's for us to help them in the area of employment or just creating that pathway for them. But the way they wrote it, and it was a pretty low hitting statements that they made to combine, and just as an education piece, to combine human trafficking, a section on human trafficking with that of legalizing prostitution is an injustice to trafficked victims. The statement I'm going to make is this: you cannot advocate against human trafficking and support the legalization of prostitution. Why? Because to support the legalization would mean you support the increase of trafficking. Case in point, in every country that has legalized and or decriminalized prostitution, Amsterdam, all of these countries, they have seen an increase, documented increase in trafficking. Why? Because if it's legal, we don't have our law enforcement like banging down the doors, right? Because now we're seeing it's legal. We see legal brothels now that can be owned by pimps in New York, and they can continue the dark trade of trafficking. That's where the problem comes in. The problem isn't helping those that are in the trade. The problem is in the ramification of the legalization. So what we're saying is, don't legalize this on the back of my black and brown and my immigrants. Why? Where do you think these legal brothels are going to be? You think they're going to be down on Fifth Avenue? You think these white European men is going to be frequenting Fifth Avenue? No, they're going to be lined up in our neighborhood. Everywhere you see a liquor store and massage parlors and all of those places, we're going to have our legal brothels right there. And now we're giving our kids an option. This isn't an employment option for our black and brown when we're trying to elevate their minds. And now we're saying, hey, guess what? If you don't feel like you can elevate your minds, let me just help you out, man. You got a nice body. Let's create this new employment opportunity, which is documented as one of the highest mortality rate occupation, period. Every country that has legalized it have seen an increase in deaths, an increase in violence. Amsterdam had to shut down their red light district because of the increase in violence. 40,000 youth showed up to say, can we please get this trade no longer to be legalized? Can we just turn back the pages? Why? Because it is a violent trade. It is not safe. And those that are advocating for it is like the 1% of the 100%. And so my human trafficking victims and survivors are like, are you crazy? This is not, we don't see sex as work. I was raped. I didn't work for sex. I was
And
raped. And
it
so,
sounds like
so when you look at that, this report that they are now pushing is
mhm.
for the legalization
And it
of
sounds like there's
prostitution.
a kind of a confusion between the sex trafficking and sex trade. Can you explain the difference for us?
Yeah, the sex trade. Yeah, absolutely. You just think of the word trade, right? And what does trade sound like? Just what it says. It's a trade for those that are involved. And we don't like to say sex workers because we don't believe that sex is work, right? But it's the trade that involves those that are in prostitution, right? And then when you think of the whole gamut of those that are being trafficked, it's a form of modern day slavery in which individuals perform commercial sex through the use of force, fraud, coercion, and it's for the purpose of exploitation. However, minors under the age of 18 do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion to be considered a victim of human trafficking, regardless of the use of force, fraud, or coercion. So that is the difference. Like those that are in the sex industry specifically is in the business of prostitution. It's activities that involve providing sexual services for money, such as prostitution, etc., selling sex. So that's the trade, right? And then you have the trafficking. Human trafficking is a crime, period. It is a crime. Like to force someone into having sex for the purpose of exploitation, right? It has to have exploitation. That's a longer lesson. I can't go through it now, but it has to be for the purpose of exploitation to be considered trafficking. And so when we talk about trafficking, that's one thing. When we talk about the sex trade, that's another thing. That's why this report is so slanted. It did not include the voices of major organizations out in New York City that may have to have something to say against it. We voiced our opinion, and it was like a day too late because we did not see this report. Many of the advocates, human trafficking survivors, were like, are you kidding me? You're going to create this legalization on our backs after I had to endure rape 20 to 30 X amount of times, and now you're saying this 1% that's advocating for it, the legalization, now we're going to see the ramifications of this in our city. That's why we're saying not on my watch. This is crazy. This cannot happen in our city, period. And even one of the bills that were written, one of the bills, we just say this one point, and I know we have a short time, and this is a longer segment, but one of the bills that had been advocated for had said, they had a section that said, oh, we can even turn NYCHA apartments into legal brothels. I'm like, are you crazy? Do you see the intentionality of creating this atrocity on the backs of my black and brown? And this is not even a statement about, how moral standing. This is just simply violence being increased, trafficking being increased, all because we're thinking about legalizing prostitution.
And what are some alternatives that the city can pursue instead of this plan?
Yes, that's very good. Thank you for asking. There are several things they can do. One of the things that's very, very important in this space is that they need survivors' voices around anything they do, any task force they form, not survivors' voices to, just to have them as like, temporary, like, just for people, just for show, just to have them sitting at a table, but true engaging voices around the table that come from survivors. Number two, don't, instead of the legalization, right? Instead of that, knowing the violence, knowing the increase in human traffic victims, and knowing the decrease in the age of traffic victims as a result of legalization and decriminalization in every country, and somehow we think we can get it right? Are we crazy? Nevada even said Nevada is not safe for women after they did the whole legalization. So what they need to do is think of what can we do to serve and provide resources for those that are in or coming out? What can we do to not criminalize the victim? We see them as victims. They are not criminals. What can we do to not criminalize and constantly see them as victims and provide resources for them, help them? How do we get resource centers throughout our entire state? Other countries have done it and they've done it right. There's some models that we need to look at to incorporate into our own city. What can we do to create sensitivity with our officers and the population? How do we create the pathway to being able to survive, to thrive, and not only survive? And I think a lot of it has to do with the NYPD. It has to do with the survivor themselves, and it has to do with government, but it also has to do with community. So we need more resources in the pot, or I should say the cash pot, in the budget, so that we can help our survivors with housing and help them with a model that I created, which was called High Point. It's a model of housing with wraparound services so that they can, as I said earlier, thrive and not only survive. The key is in resources.
And this is a lot of great information. For anyone who wants to learn more, how can folks get in contact with you?
Please write me, talk to me about your support of this. Help me get this message out and across. Otherwise, we're going to be in a horrible state as a city. You can write me directly at RevQ, REVQUE at Not On My Watching, NOMWI.org. For more information, go to my website, www.nomwi.org, nomwi.org. Let's stop this from happening in our city, but at the same time, let's get services for those that are in the life.
Dr. Q, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We are taking a quick break with Open Tuesday, but we will be right back.